Good afternoon, Wednesday the 6th of July 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, in England, the weather is always a good topic of conversation, and it's grey in Glasgow, but we've had the unusual comment that it's apparently fine in Yorkshire, suitable for a hanging. Not too sure what that one's about, Mike, but let's move on with some positive things. And we'd just like to say thank you very much to the person that sent us this email. It's always nice to receive compliments. We thought we'd read this one out. Just a brief message to say how great it is to listen to all the UK Columns presenters, Alex Thomson and David Ellis and all the others, give us what we are denied in what passes for news and topical discussion in other media. It is a pleasure to listen to reports and analysis by intelligent and articulate people. There is hope for our country yet when we have people like those associated with the UK column. God bless you all. Well, I'm going to say thank you very much for that. I will also say we do pay attention to people who make suggestions as how we can do things better. But it is a big boost for morale when we get a nice email coming in. And I'd also like to say thank you very much to the person who sent us this very nice card with a donation. Thank you very much. It is greatly appreciated.
So that's the good news. That's
the good news. Now we get into the reality of what's going on in this country. I made this tweet a few hours ago. Why do I keep banging on about child abuse? Because it is the engine of this criminal, perverted Westminster elite. Stop it, and the country will improve. That was my message. We stand by that. If we are to get to grips with what is really going on in this country, we have to understand that child abuse is the blackmail route for the political control. So, Mike, you're going to take us to this very brave lady.
Yes, because child abuse is one aspect of child trafficking, of course, and this is Roelie Post. Many people may be aware of Roelie Post already, but I want to give you a bit of news because the European Commission has started invalidity procedures against Roelie. They are trying to declare her insane, and they're being supported by her employers in the United Nations. Now, why are they trying to do this? Well, of course, Roelie Post was exposing child trafficking and child abuse, particularly from the Romanian orphanages. So let's highlight her book, Romania for Export Only, first of all. Secondly, there is a documentary out and about on YouTube. You'll find it. Search a Child, Pay Cash is what it's called. And in it, for example, she meets a woman whose baby was taken away. She's didn't know what became of the child, and then subsequently found out that the child was taken to the United States and adopted. The mother had not signed any kind of consent form for this, had never been to court. So the baby was effectively stolen and sold, and Roelie Post highlighting case after case of this type of thing, particularly from the Romanian orphanages, as I say. The documentary goes into great detail, including arrests of a paedophile who was working with children in Bucharest and so on. Do recommend the book. Do recommend the documentary. Go and find out about the work of Roelie Post. But that is a lady that needs support at this point in time.
Absolutely. And if we just put her story into a snapshot, she discovers in Romania, where she was posted to work, that what the public were being told was, of course, not true. And she started to discover that the Romanian children were, of course, being trafficked and used. When she reported this through the European Union, she was suspended, hounded, had toy guns left on her doorstep. So a particularly vicious response to yet another very brave lady trying to get the truth out about what's been happening to children. Well, she certainly didn't get any help from British politicians, and I'm not surprised. I just wanted to bring this on screen as an example of what we deal with. So somebody sent us an email. They'd contacted their MP, Jonathan Lord, Conservative MP. Hello, Mr. Lord. If you have today's Daily Telegraph, do have a look at the letters. There's one which points out that the Isle of Man is not part of the EU, pays nothing in and receives nothing back, is not part of the Schengen area but enjoys free trade with the EU, enacts laws, levies taxes and issues British Islands passports. It then ends with sounds ideal. Can we be the same? Now that surely sets a precedent which the UK could use. So where does that take us? Well, let's see what the gentleman said, and here's his response. He says, "Dear Sonia, it's certainly something to think about with best wishes." So there's the fob off, and what sort of man would do this? Well, here he is. Words fail me actually at this point, Mike. These are disgusting people. And on his website it says, "Contact me about the big issues facing Woking and nationally." So a big issue is brought to his attention, major issue, and what does he get? You know, you're some little piece of dirt on my shoe, go away. No wonders that we got big problems. So major issue, of course, is Chilcot, and you've been listening to that, Mike, and are going to be giving us a little bit of detail about what's been coming out this morning. But let's remind viewers that Alex Thomson spoke out yesterday, and of course very well versed due to his experience as a former analyst with GCHQ. Now, we've got an actual a transcript of what he said yesterday, and if I can just highlight that for you on screen. He said the first thing we had in the services, he's talking about the intelligence agencies, of course, was there was a drive to connect Saddam to something we could pin to him. So a political agenda being rammed home into the agencies. And he went on here and said, "I've said it before, but Sir John Chilcot was at this very time of the Iraq War nonetheless than the staff counsellor for the agencies, at least for GCHQ, and I believe for the other two as well. So he was the man you went to if you had problems of conscience about what you were being told to do." So very, very pertinent comment there by Alex Thomson. Just bringing this from the New Statesman, which I thought was interesting, why I have no faith in Chilcot's inquiry on Iraq. So the journalist who wrote this describes Chilcot as establishment. Is he really going to get to the bottom of how we ended up in Iraq? He doesn't think so, and he quotes down here Philip Sands QC, who described Chilcot after watching him closely during the Butler inquiry. That was also to do with Iraq. And he says, having some familiarity with Sir John's questioning, it is not immediately apparent that he will have the backbone to take on former government ministers. So against that background, Mike, what have you found from Mr. Chilcot's dulcet tones today?
Well, here's the front page of the inquiry, executive summary of the inquiry report, and you'll notice that it is a report of a committee of Privy Councillors, so that gives us some confidence to start off with, right?
So it was all done in secret?
No, just Privy Councillors, yeah. Well, here's the first quote we have. "We have, however, concluded that the circumstances in which it was decided that there was a legal basis for UK military action were far from satisfactory. We have concluded that the UK chose to join the invasion of Iraq before the peaceful options for disarmament had been exhausted. Military action at that time was not a last resort." He went on to say that Tony Blair did not establish clear ministerial oversight of UK planning and preparation. He did not ensure that there was a flexible, realistic and fully resourced plan that integrated UK military and civilian contributions and addressed the known risks. And he said that it's now clear that policy on Iraq was made on the basis of flawed intelligence and assessments. They were not challenged, and they should have been. He said that in March 2003, there was no imminent threat from Saddam Hussein. The strategy of containment could have been adapted and continued for some time. The majority of the Security Council supported continuing UN inspections and monitoring. He said that the findings of the Iraq Survey Group in 2004, which Mr. Blair and Mr. Straw described, so he's in the Iraq Survey Group findings, They were talking about the weapons of mass destruction, and he's saying that Mr. Blair and Mr. Straw had described them as vast stocks and an urgent and growing threat. That's before they went to war. And then at the 2004 inquiry, he told the Commons that although Iraq might not have had stockpiles of actually deployable weapons, so the story was changed before the 2004 investigation and after the 2004 investigation. And he also pointed out that Saddam Hussein retained the intent and capability and was in breach of UN resolutions. That's what Blair was trying to justify his actions based on. Chilcot, though, said that was not, however, the explanation for military action he had given before the conflict. So it's absolutely clear from Chilcot in the language that Chilcot used, which, as most people have noticed, is understated and not really terribly direct. Nonetheless, he is not, in what he said this morning, he wasn't blaming the military. He wasn't blaming the intelligence services. All he said, as I pointed out there, he said that the intelligence was incorrect and should have been challenged. He absolutely put the blame at Tony Blair's feet. We were talking about something else earlier, Brian, and you said, this is almost the way things work in Britain still. We use this soft language. Actually, bearing in mind what Chilcot is, Privy Councillor and whatnot, this is probably as strong as language as he would have been prepared to use. Right. So perhaps we can't expect any more out of him in terms of the strength of the language, but if you actually read the words, it's pretty clear what he's saying. Well, and of course we're just getting an overview, a summary here, aren't we? So it's going to come to reading that £700 document. Will be available online, I understand. And how many million words is it? Well, it's 2.6, isn't it? 2.6 million words. So going back into the media, 12 months it was only £2 million, so they've added another 600,000 words in the last. 2.6 million words. So clearly he's been value for money at £750 a day. In the last 12 months, he's added an extra 600,000 words. Yeah, it must be difficult to know how you get past on that. But I take your point, Mike, that he's come out in this terribly polite, gentlemanly language. I find this obscene, actually, because what are we talking about? He admits, he's already admitted we're dealing in deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, or is it millions? And we're still going to use this very genteel old boy's language because we're dealing with politicians and they are right honourable gentlemen. Like himself, of course. Yeah. So then that was followed up by Prime Minister's questions, of course, and the first obscene comment from David Cameron was this: "We send our sympathies and condolences to all those who've been victims of appalling terrorist attacks in Baghdad, Medina and Istanbul." And of course, these terrorist attacks follow on from everything that happened in 2003 and since then. So the hypocrisy here is incredible. But Cameron went on to say, "I think the most important thing we can do," he's talking about the inquiry report now, "I think the most important thing we can do is really learn lessons for the future, and the Chilcot report lays them out clearly. So we don't worry about what happened in the past. We learn our lessons. We made mistakes. We're allowed to make mistakes. As long as we learn from them and move on, we don't have to..." It doesn't matter who is killed, murdered, tortured, bombed, ripped apart. And of course, this was the language from Alan West, former Admiral Alan West. I had a slide yesterday. I wish I'd put it in to follow David Cameron there, because there was Alan West saying that some bee told him, i.e. to use forces to go in. Some bee told him, and we really don't want to witch hunt. We just need to learn these lessons. This is also obscene, and of course, it's particularly obscene because this wasn't what was used in the Nuremberg war trials. So anybody who said, "Well, I was given the order to go and kill those people," they were still subject to summary execution. Well, in fact, they were hanged, weren't they? Well, absolutely. This business of mistakes and move on, this is very much common purpose training. This is very, very important stuff, which we've seen in a lot of common purpose training, type training. And of course, if you bring it into the NHS, what does it mean? Well, somebody died, but it doesn't matter because the NHS is going to be better. I'll use the sign language, better in the future. So it's very, very dangerous stuff. And for Cameron to talk
condolences for those who suffered under terrorism. We have been the terrorists, Mr. Cameron, and you are responsible now for covering it up. Well, let's get into the subject of immigration, because this still causes immense passion for people, in some ways quite rightly, but it depends how that passion comes to the fore. So I thought we needed to have a little look here at really what immigration and immigration policy is about. And why immigration is the question. Well, I've got some answers to that here, because the aim of immigration into UK and indeed other countries in Europe is to change the culture, the views and the political values of that traditional country, be it Britain. And of course, Britain was a particular, be it Britain or another country, it could be France. So you want to change the views, so you start to mix the cultures. But of course, Britain was particularly dangerous because we seem to have an instinct of suspicion about the European Union. Excuse me. So the immigration is going to directly attack national identity and particularly the nation state. It's going to divide communities, and that brings in, of course, divide and rule, making it easier for the criminal elite in Westminster to do that, to divide us and rule us. It assists the formation of the EU superstate by removing borders and controls. And of course, it's going to undermine national security by a massive increase in unidentified migrants. And we'll come on to that a bit more in a minute. It's going to ramp up the fear of crime, rapes, child abuse, terrorist attacks. It's going to encourage the population to spy on each other in order to protect society. And you're going to use the fear of terrorism and an increasingly chaotic social and community relations to introduce draconian state initiatives and controls. And what have we got? We've got Prevent, MAPA, and of course the Civil Contingencies Act sitting in the background. And we're going to enable the creation of armed paramilitary black shirt thug police. We're seeing more and more of those. And we'll end on number 10. We're going to be able to ramp up cultural Marxism with controls on free speech and the use of labelling. This is very, very dangerous stuff, calling people racists if they dare speak out, hate speech, xenophobia. And on top of that, you need somebody like Theresa May, future Prime Minister. I think she's suitable because she's going to lie and fudge the figures over immigration and deny so that this policy continues, and it's continuing at a pace. So we just remind our viewers and listeners what UK columnists mentioned before. So here we had BBC News spinning the story that Russia and Syria were weaponizing migration. This is a brilliant piece of BBC propaganda. Telegraph following it along here, Vladimir Putin weaponizing refugee crisis to break Europe. It's fascinating, isn't it, when you see it with a little bit of water. So here he is, that nasty man. But they don't mention this man. Here he is, Bilderberger, UN Special Representative for Migration, Peter Sutherland, KCMG. The EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to undermine the homogeneity of European countries. He states it, Mike. He states it.
I haven't heard Vladimir Putin state it.
Of course you haven't, because of course we should be looking at the UN and the Bilderberg outfit for the trouble. But certainly the BBC isn't quoting Mr. Peter Sutherland, because if they did, the scam would be all over in no time at all. EU is responsible for the migration, not Putin. And then, of course, here's the bit about the terrorism. So we've got General Philip Breedlove. And what's he saying? Well, basically, it's ISIS spreading like a cancer amongst those refugees. Mm-hmm. And here it goes. Refugees from the Middle East and North Africa are masking the movement of terrorists and criminals, fear, hate. And this is coming straight out of NATO. Islamic State terror groups spreading like a cancer. Russia's bombing campaign has exacerbated the problem. Let's blame somebody else. And here we are, Kremlin and Assad intent to use migration as a weapon to weaken European unity. This is utter propaganda and lies. And then this was the icing on the cake, that European nationalist groups that oppose immigration weaken the continent and could themselves threaten violence. So if you dare to speak out, according to General Breedhate, of course his real name, then it's the fault of anybody that questions it. And this is the reality about immigration, that the men and women, the migrants, and their suffering are being used by some despicable people to further a geopolitical objective. So let's remember Tony Blair, because of course he was a major player in this, the breakdown of the British nation state, and a lot of this was done in the central London boroughs under New Labour. Gordon Brown continued it. Cameron follows it on. Here she is, Prime Minister in waiting, and she is going to lie. She's going to fudge the figures in order to keep this process going. And we better put in a useful idiot, Lynn Homer, formerly in charge of the border agency, common purpose trained. And of course, under her leadership, nobody knew how many people were coming into the country. So she did such a good job as a useful idiot. She's promoted to the Treasury.
Perhaps for new viewers and listeners, we should explain the term useful idiot.
Well, useful idiot, of course, was coined by used by Julia Middleton, the Chief Executive of Common Purpose, in her book Beyond Authority, where she said calmly, we should be prepared to use useful idiots to get our political agenda into the UK. And of course, it's Oliver Letwin, who is running the country via the Cabinet Office, who is also using the common purpose model to train civil servants. So let's bring him in. He said what the truth is, that this is a plan in order to break down European countries and form the EU superstate. And I couldn't resist it. Just a terrible, terrible article in the local Plymouth Herald today. Hidden cameras could record racism in Plymouth's hate crime hotspots. Read this article because it is a complete fabrication, classic fear. 1 minute they're talking about race hate, and the next minute they're talking about Brexit. This stuff is becoming so obvious, Mike, because it seems that the propaganda can be driven through very local level newspapers. So presumably this is as a result of the, the grouping up of media agencies across the country. You have a paper, it says it's local, but actually it's part of a much bigger group.
And playing a national agenda.
Playing a national agenda. So if we just lead in gently to Theresa May, thank you very much to the person who sent this article through. Home Office's Olly Robbins excused from Select Committee after unsatisfactory answers on border force funding. So here's all the lies and obfuscation around the border force. And this was all to do with money. So the committee chair, Keith Vaz, was pushing him on what the financial position of the border agency was. He couldn't answer. And they were particularly interesting because apparently there had been calls for savings of 5% across the wider department and a 30% reduction in administrative spending. Now that's a massive amount, Mike, if your intention is to make sure that the border agency works. He couldn't answer the questions. And then what's happened? Our future Prime Minister stepped in to defend him, and she sought to diffuse the row. So forget the figures and facts and truth. She's diffused the row. So neither Mr. Olly Robbins or Theresa May attended the committee. I've put in lies and spin. But isn't this just the material for the new Prime Minister? Because we can also see this woman is a liar.
Well, let's just have a little light-hearted look at Theresa May, because here's a tweet from the Huffington Post. Justine Greening explains why she's on Team Theresa. And I don't know if you've seen Justine Greening in the House of Commons, Brian, but the long-distance shot from the wide-angle camera, and her eyes just pierce right through the distance, and you can see there's something there.
There's something very dark and dangerous in this woman, without question.
So let's just have a closer look at this. And really, I'm going to say about Theresa May the same. The eyes have it. And if we compare with our favourite man of the moment, really, I'm going to say, on the basis of nothing other than her eyes, that she is no Margaret Thatcher. She is much more of a Tony Blair.
Yeah.
And if she becomes our next Prime Minister, I think that's exactly what we're going to get, much more of a Tony Blair.
Right, and we'll just keep saying to our audience, of course, what does Theresa May mean? I nearly said Theresa Blair there, so obviously something's happening on screen. What does Theresa May mean? Well, it means a Prime Minister, of course, who will be running this vast state spying system. It is really incredible. It puts East Germany into the pale. This is modern surveillance on a huge scale. And of course, it's Theresa May at the moment that's sitting back calmly while children are being stolen from their families. Well, where does it go? Well, we've talked about black-shirted police, but of course, we're seeing here in America where it goes. This is a horrific story from a couple of days ago about a young lady who has had brain cancer, and that has left her with certain emotional problems and some physical limitations. And basically, she was smashed to the ground by American airport security men after she set off one of the alarms, and she was unable to deal with the situation. So she's had surgery and treatment from the age of 2 years old. She's easily confused and frightened in unfamiliar circumstances. So when the alarm went off, she reacted badly, and they slammed her to the floor, smashing her face into the floor. And you can see the blood and the distress on her face. Now, I want to bring in this man because Matthew Teague from The Guardian in the US wrote this article. He makes no analysis of it at all. How can this happen? And if this is the state of free America, where does it leave us in the West? This is horrific stuff, and I think we can expect to see this coming in at places like Heathrow if Theresa May becomes Prime Minister. Well, in the background, of course, the Brexit scam goes on, and we just wanted to highlight that the Express is warning that Sir Julian King, who used to work in the Commission and is regarded as a good fit for the vacancy, with MEPs expected to take a hostile line against any political nominee who backed Brexit. So here we are, 51-year-old's 30-year Foreign Office career has included long stints in Brussels and, working on European defence. But there isn't any European defence, Mike, apparently.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Well, if you want to check him out, and I'd encourage you to do it, start off with Wikipedia perhaps, and you'll see that this man is a safe pair of hands steeped in the EU Superstate project. So quite clear that the government scam is to delay Brexit at every stage of the game, meanwhile carrying on the procedure of locking us into the EU.
Yes, okay, change of subject. Digital Economy Act. Sorry, it's not an act yet. Digital Economy Bill. This is improving government data to transform public services, apparently. Clauses in the new Digital Economy Bill will help the public sector transform lives through better access to information. And this is part of the government's commitment to make the UK, they describe it, the most digital nation in the world. So they've introduced the Digital Economy Bill to Parliament. It will help build world-class digital infrastructure and transform the way in which government and individuals are able to interact. Part of it will be to change the way government uses data to improve public services. So let's see, the main changes being introduced are aimed at allowing public authorities to share personal data with other public authorities in specific contexts in order to improve the welfare of individuals, for example, the Troubled Families Programme.
Oh, well, perfect. So we've got the Dohertys tracked through Scotland into Ireland, and here's assistance for more of the same.
Yes, we're going to improve access to civil registration data like births, deaths and marriages, so public authorities do not send letters to people who have been who are deceased. So we're using the incompetence of people sending letters to people that are deceased in order to mitigate to provide this this further integration of data sharing, helping to detect and prevent losses government currently experiences due to fraudulent activity each year. They should perhaps investigate their own expenses then under those circumstances. Providing new mechanisms to detect and collect public sector debt that currently stands at 24 billion. Helping individuals to manage their debt by providing a means of support and making it easier to use data for research purposes. Is that behavioral insights, perhaps?
Oh, I would have thought so, yeah.
Yes. So I just thought that was quite ironic, bearing in mind the story that we pointed out yesterday, 2,300 data breaches from the police in 5 years.
Yeah.
So I thought we should consider this bill in that context.
So you bring in more centralised collection of data, you make sure there's leaks and data's lost, and then you use that as the excuse to bring in even greater collection of data.
Yes.
It's pretty clever stuff until you can see what it is.
Indeed. Well, it's 2 days until the NATO summit in Warsaw. Today's NATO grain of truth, or should I say propaganda, is there are 2 North American NATO allies, Canada and the US. So that was the best that they could do on the number 2. That's
Right.
pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I'm going to warn everybody that I'm not quite sure I can actually pronounce Antony Macierewicz's name. Macierewicz.
Yeah.
So he is the Polish defense minister, and he, of course, takes every opportunity to attack Russia at every turn. He's saying that they're looking forward to the NATO summit because, of course, it's in Warsaw. And he was speaking to the Associated Press. He was saying that NATO's new deployments, that we were talking about this yesterday, to Eastern Europe will end the fear in Poland. He said, only a show of real readiness to defend our borders can effectively halt Russia's aggressive intentions. Russia must forget about threatening Poland and European countries and other countries in the world. And with the troops that are coming, he said, we are becoming a full member of NATO. He said not only a political one, but one we have always very much wanted to be, one that the Poles have waited 70 years to be. We will be fully protected by a joint force. He's delusional.
Well, he certainly is if he thinks Britain's going to protect him, but then we've got a record of letting the Poles down, I believe.
And indeed, we treated them pretty badly after the war, didn't we?
Or at the beginning of the war, guaranteeing their safety, and then I think we failed to do so.
Well, indeed.
So we're doing it again. But
yes.
They haven't learnt.
So 2 days to go to the summit. And today NATO has published defence expenditures of NATO countries from 2009 to 2016. So I thought we'd just have a brief look at those. Here is the graph showing that, United Kingdom is third for spending. This is a proportion of gross domestic product. We are spending 2.21%. The United States, as you would expect, is first with 3.61% of GDP. And Poland, they're 2% of GDP, but of course that's in zlotys. So when we actually go and look at the figures, they're not spending a huge amount of money. But the United Kingdom there, Brian, I was interested in this because apparently in 2009 we were spending £37.5 billion on defence. And this year, 2016, we're going to be spending £41 billion on defence. And I just wasn't clear how such draconian cuts were required in the 2 strategic defence reviews.
Well, I think this is a very, very good piece of information you found here, Mike, because we just asked the question, if the spending is relatively static and we've got these massive cuts, where is the money going? It's not going on equipment because we've less ships, less aircraft, less troops. So where is the money actually going? I mean, that is the question, isn't it?
I can't answer it.
Neither can I. But what we do know is that we've seen massive cuts in the Army, the Air Force and the Navy, massive cuts to the extent that neither of the 3 services can function properly at the moment. So where's the money going, Mr. Cameron? Hopefully our viewers and listeners will pick up on that because we obviously need some help on it.
That's it for today?
That's it for today. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much again for those kind donations that have come in. If you like what we're doing, please consider taking out a subscription because that way we know that we know the support and it's very welcome. And we'll be back same time tomorrow. Join us then. Bye-bye.